On Sunday morning, the 21st of August, 1966, police officers, firefighters, reporters, and volunteers began climbing Morro do Vintem in Niteroi, Brazil. They were looking for two men who had already been lying near the summit for 4 days. The hill was steep, wet, and webbed with rough paths. Even with local guides, the climb took more than 2 hours. Near the top, the search party entered a small clearing and found two bodies on a bed of broad palm leaves. The men were lying side by side on their backs. Both wore business suits under new raincoats. There were no bullet wounds, no knife wounds, and no torn ground from a struggle. Their papers were still in their pockets. One of them still had money hidden in a plastic bag inside his clothing. Beside their heads were two objects that made the clearing look less like a crime scene and more like the remains of an appointment. They were masks, hammered from sheet lead. Each mask had been curved to fit over the eyes. There were no eye holes. There were no straps. They could not filter air, stop a blow, or protect the rest of the body. There were shields made for men who expected to see something they believed their eyes should not meet directly. The searchers found a nearly empty bottle of mineral water, 2 towels, pieces of foil folded into small cups, cigarettes, matches, and papers covered with electrical calculations. They also found a short handwritten instruction. The punctuation has been argued over for decades, but the sequence is plain enough. Be at the agreed place at 4:30. At 6:30, swallow the capsules. After the effect, protect the metals. Await the signal. Mask. The men had followed the note all the way to that clearing. Their wristwatch and a wedding ring had been tucked away from the skin. Their lead shields were beside their faces. The bottle had been opened. The foil had been used. But the capsules were gone. So was most of the money they had carried. And no doctor would ever be able to say what killed them. Their names were Miguel José Viana and Manoel Pereira da Cruz. They were not drifters, thrill seekers, or strangers to one another. They were working radio and television technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, more than 100 miles away. 4 days before the clearing was opened, they had left home in daylight with a large sum of cash and a story their families would soon discover was false. Miguel was 34. Manoel was 32. Both men repaired radios and television sets at a time when the back of a television looked like a small power station. Glass valves, transformers, coils, hot solder, and enough stored voltage to injure a careless hand. Their surviving papers show men who understood the trade. Codes that later newspapers treated like secret writing turned out to be identifiers for ordinary electronic valves. EY 88, ECL 82, 12, AU 7. The sort of markings a technician might copy while ordering parts or planning a repair. Miguel had completed electronics courses in Sao Paulo and a correspondence course from national schools in Los Angeles. He kept contact with other technical schools in the United States. In Campos, the two men were known for being able to repair sets other technicians could not. Whatever led them to Vintem Hill did not begin with two men who knew nothing about electricity. But the workshop did not end at household appliances. Miguel and Manoel were interested in high-voltage experiments, radio transmission, unusual light, and spiritual ideas that circulated through several groups in Brazil during the 1960s. Friends and relatives described experiments meant to reach other planes, receive messages, or produce some kind of contact through electronics and altered consciousness. The line between technician and believer was not as clean as it looks from a distance. A radio already turned invisible signals into human voices. A television pulled moving faces out of the air. For men who spent their days repairing those machines, the idea that another signal might be waiting beyond the usual dial did not begin as pure fantasy. It began with equipment they could build and effects they could see. The lead masks were made in the workshop. One account said the men used a borrowed sheet of lead and cut it with tools available to them. The workmanship was crude but deliberate. The two pieces matched. They were not improvised on the hill. Neither man told his family about the masks. On the morning of Wednesday, August 17, Manoel said he and Miguel were going to Sao Paulo to buy a car and electronic components. The car explained the money. the parts explained the trip. Both explanations were useful because neither was true. They were going to Niteroi. The trip left a trail of small records behind it. Miguel and Manoel boarded a bus from Campos to Niteroi. Their tickets placed them in seats 25 and 26. They arrived early in the afternoon carrying a package and enough cash to draw attention if anyone knew it was there. Some of that money belonged to friends who believed the men were traveling to Sao Paulo and had asked them to bring back purchases. Manoel had packed 2 towels in a separate parcel. Before boarding, the men even met Elcio, the associate who would later be questioned about the beach explosion. He said he believed the Sao Paulo story too. At an electronics shop called Fluscop, they asked for Philips components that were not in stock. The owner found the request odd because experienced technicians should have known those parts were unlikely to be found in Niteroi. Miguel and Manoel had been calm when they entered. They even invited the owner to continue with them to Sao Paulo. He declined. Something changed in the few minutes after they left Fluscop. At about 2:45, the men entered a clothing store and bought 2 identical raincoats. The saleswoman remembered them as hurried and agitated. Although rain was falling outside, they did not put the new coats on when they left. It was raining in Niteroi, but they had traveled without proper coats. The purchase could have been practical. It could also have been part of instructions they had not shared with anyone else. Either way, the matching coats would still be on their bodies when the search party reached the clearing. The sales clerk remembered that one of the men looked nervous and kept checking the time. The note in Miguel's pocket had already set the first deadline, 4:30 at the agreed place. From the clothing store, they went to a small bar and bought a bottle of mineral water. Miguel asked for a receipt so he could return the bottle and recover the deposit. The detail survived because the bar employee remembered it after the bodies were found. A man planning to disappear does not usually worry about returning an empty bottle. Miguel did. The purchase was made around 3:15. The men had little more than an hour to cross the remaining distance and climb the hill. They moved toward Andrade Pinto Street, where several tracks led into the growth covering Morro do Vintem. The city sat below them. The clearing waited near the summit. Sunset would come at about 5:35, and the second time written on the note was 6:30, almost an hour after dark. They carried no tent. No flashlight was listed among the things recovered. They were not preparing to spend the night. They expected to complete whatever had brought them there and walk back down. The climb itself is the first blank in the timeline. One report described a jeep carrying several men toward the foot of the hill that afternoon. Another story said 5 men began climbing. Police never secured a reliable identification from the central witness, and no third participant was proved to have reached the clearing. Contemporary papers counted 8 separate tracks up the hill. Under favorable conditions, the climb from Andrade Pinto Street to the summit took about 70 minutes. Miguel and Manoel had left the bar after 3:15. To meet the 4:30 instruction, they had almost no room to choose a wrong path or stop for long. Miguel and Manoel did reach it. Near the summit, they found a small concrete marker. Investigators later wondered whether it had served as the reference point for the appointment. It may have been nothing more than a survey marker. On a hill, with several rough trails, it also would have been an easy object to name in directions. The men cut or gathered broad palm leaves and arranged them on the ground. Reports said the leaves were tough enough that a knife should have been needed, yet no knife was recovered. Then they waited. Another paper found with the men appeared to describe a 4-day capsule schedule. Sunday, after a meal. Monday, while fasting. Tuesday, after a meal. Wednesday, lying down. August 17 was a Wednesday. If that schedule belonged to the same plan, the event on the hill had begun days before the bus left Campos. The masks had already been made. The capsules had already been obtained. Someone had chosen a place, a date, and 2 separate times. At 4:30, the men were supposed to be in position. At 6:30, they were supposed to swallow the capsules. The hour between those instructions passed, while daylight drained from the hill. Below them, windows and streetlights would have appeared across Niteroi. Around them, wet leaves and low cloud would have swallowed what remained of the sky. Miguel removed his wristwatch and placed it in a pocket. A wedding ring was tied to a pair of reading glasses and put inside his jacket. The words "protect metals" may explain both actions. Perhaps the men expected an electrical or magnetic effect. Perhaps they believed metal touching the skin would become dangerous. Perhaps the instruction meant something understood only inside their group. The foil cups suggest they divided or mixed something. The mineral water gave them a way to swallow it. The towels may have been meant for sweat, rain, or another physical reaction. The lead shields had only one purpose anyone can see. They covered the eyes. Lead can reduce some forms of radiation, but those thin handmade plates were not serious protection from an unknown source. They looked like two technicians taking a familiar material and applying it to a danger they did not fully understand. No witness saw the men at 6:30. There may have been another person in the clearing, someone who supplied the capsules or dictated the instructions. Miguel and Manoel had carried enough money to buy a car. They trusted the plan enough to lie to their families, travel for hours, climb into darkness, and put themselves on the ground with their vision blocked. If someone stood over them, that person left no name behind. The other possibility is lonelier. At the appointed minute, Miguel checked the watch one last time. Both men drank from the bottle, used the foil cups, swallowed whatever they had brought, lay back on the palm leaves, and lifted the masks over their eyes. They waited for the signal. Sometime after 7 that evening, Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho was driving near the hill with her 3 children. They saw a bright object above the summit and stopped the car. Gracinda described an orange oval or disc bordered by what looked like fire. Blue rays appeared to extend from it. The light moved up and down above the hill for several minutes before it vanished. She told her husband when she reached home. He returned toward the area, but the light was gone. Only after the bodies made the news did the family learn where Miguel and Manoel had been lying. The sighting came to police after the case was public. It was testimony, not a photograph. Memory can change when a later event gives an earlier light a new shape. Niteroi had aircraft, power lines, radio facilities, weather, and city glare enough to produce ordinary explanations. But the note said, "Wait for the signal." 4 people said a brilliant orange light appeared over the hill shortly after the scheduled capsules were taken. And by then, Miguel and Manoel were no longer coming home. The first known person to see the men was a boy hunting on the hill the next morning. From a distance, he saw 2 figures lying in the clearing. He could not tell whether they were sleeping or dead. He reported them to a nearby patrolman, but nothing was done. The bodies remained there through another day and another night. On Saturday, August 20, a young man climbing after a kite found them again and went to the police. It was late, the weather was poor, and the route was difficult. Officers waited until morning before making the climb. By then, 4 days of heat and rain had damaged the bodies and softened the scene around them. Miguel and Manoel were still dressed. Their documents made identification easy. The raincoats partly covered them. Some reports mentioned blood around the mouths or noses and on the leaves beneath them, but decomposition had already made the detail hard to interpret. There was no obvious violence. Among the papers were a newspaper dated August 17, and, in one contemporary report, 2 unused tickets back to Campos. Like the bottle receipt, the tickets belonged to men who expected the night to end with a return journey. There was also no capsule bottle, no wrapper, no vial, and no apparatus that could explain what the men had expected to happen. A clean handkerchief, embroidered with the initials AMS, did not belong to either family. Small pieces of cellophane were reported with an unknown substance on them. Neither clue led to a proven third person. The money created a second absence. The men were believed to have carried far more than police recovered. Some cash remained hidden in their clothing, enough to make a simple robbery look careless. Most of the larger sum was gone. If another participant had been on the hill, that person could have removed the capsules, their container, any experimental device, and the money before walking away. If no one else had been there, then somebody may have found the bodies before the police did. The masks themselves were found beside the heads or hands, not strapped across the faces as later retellings often show. They had no straps. That correction does not make the scene ordinary. It means the men had either removed them during distress, dropped them as they lost control of their bodies, or set them within reach and died before the expected signal arrived. The medical examination should have settled the case. Instead, it ruined the last chance to settle it. The Niteroi medical examiner's office was overwhelmed by another major case. An important detective had been murdered that morning, and his body received priority. An assistant handled the preparation of Miguel and Manoel's decomposed remains. The organs needed for toxicology sat without the proper testing until they were too deteriorated to use. A reporter who visited the office after the burial learned they had been discarded. Contemporary reports disagree on exactly which samples were taken and when. They agree on the result. No dependable toxicology answer survived. The death records did not say the men died from aliens, radiation, poison, or heart failure. They said decomposition prevented the cause of death from being determined. In August 1967, the bodies were exhumed. Heavy formaldehyde use had made useful chemical testing even harder. Later atomic analysis reportedly found normal levels of arsenic, mercury, barium, and thallium. That ruled out nothing beyond the substances and samples still available. A prescription drug, contaminated compound, fast-clearing poison, psychedelic, or mixture could have disappeared before anyone knew what to search for. The only men who knew what the capsules contained had died on the hill. Police soon learned that the masks were not the first experiment connected to Miguel and Manoel. Weeks or months earlier, a violent event had shaken Atafona Beach near Campos. Residents heard an explosion around 9 at night. Reports described a flash or reddish ball of light over the water, a concussion heard miles away, trembling windows, and damage to nearby buildings. A police official who went toward the beach reported a sulfur-like smell and a deep track in the sand. Some people blamed a wartime mine. Others described a strange vessel or a flying object. Military services became interested, partly because unregistered radio transmissions had reportedly been detected in the region. Miguel, Manoel, and their associate Elcio Correa Gomez were linked to the event through later testimony. Their stories did not agree. Elcio said he had been invited to watch an experiment. Another associate said Elcio seemed to know when the event would happen. Accounts shifted over who planned it, what equipment was present, and whether the men had caused the explosion or only expected the light. A smaller device had reportedly exploded in the yard at Manoel's home, leaving pieces of pipe and wire behind. The pattern was real, even if the purpose was not. The men built things. They experimented with radio, voltage, light, sound, and spiritual practice. They had already been close to at least one event, powerful enough to frighten neighbors. When they expected another flash, they made shields for their eyes. Elcio was detained after the deaths. He produced evidence placing him in Campos on the afternoon Miguel and Manoel traveled to Niteroi, and police released him. Investigators tested the masks and found no meaningful radioactivity. Electronics shops, spiritualist groups, military offices, friends, and relatives all gave the file more names without giving it a cause of death. The investigation spread through 4 states. Federal police joined it. Army, Navy, and Air Force intelligence looked for a connection to Atafona and any threat created by the men's experiments. The Navy had reportedly intercepted unregistered radio prefixes near the beach shortly before the explosion. The transmitter used by a clandestine operator Miguel knew had been sold before investigators reached it. Years later, imprisoned men offered confessions involving a robbery, poison, and a spiritualist center. Their accounts contradicted the evidence and one another. Investigators treated them as attempts to gain attention or better prison conditions. The district attorney sent the case back for more work. The work produced thicker files, not an answer. Poisoning fits more of the evidence than any other single explanation. The men followed a capsule schedule. They brought water and foil cups. They lay down together and showed no obvious injuries. A dangerous dose, drug interaction, contaminated preparation, or deliberately supplied poison could have killed both at nearly the same time. The missing container keeps that explanation from closing neatly. If the men were alone, why did no capsule bottle remain? If they threw it away, where was it? If someone removed it, what else did that person take? Robbery by deception explains the missing money and the missing container. Someone who understood the men's beliefs could have promised a demonstration, written or dictated the schedule, and instructed them to swallow poison while lying down with their eyes covered. The plan would make the victims cooperate with their own murder. It would also require a person close enough to earn their trust, informed enough to use their experiments, and calm enough to leave documents and hidden cash on the bodies. Police searched for that person and never proved one existed. A failed experiment explains the masks, the note, and the man's history. They may have carried a small device to the hill, taken a substance intended to alter consciousness, and prepared for a burst of light. But no battery, transmitter, chemical vessel, wire, or burned apparatus was found. Any machine large enough to matter had vanished with the capsules. Then there is the explanation that kept the case alive outside police files. Miguel and Manoel believed they were preparing for contact with something not human. The capsules changed their state of consciousness. The masks protected them from the signal. The orange object appeared at the appointed time. Whatever answered them left no wound a doctor could identify. Nothing in the surviving evidence proves that happened. An unexplained death does not turn a light in the sky into a spacecraft. A witness report cannot tell us what the men swallowed. The lead masks were handmade equipment, not technology from somewhere else. But the contact theory did not grow from the masks alone. It grew from the sequence the men themselves wrote down. Agreed place. Capsules. Protect the metal. Wait for the signal. Mask. That was not language added by a later television show. It was found with their bodies. The case was eventually left without a known cause of death. No one established who chose the clearing. No one identified the owner of the AMS handkerchief. No one recovered the missing money, capsule container, or possible apparatus. No test revealed what entered the men's bodies after 6:30. No investigation connected the orange light to them or separated it completely from the last instruction in Miguel's pocket. What survived was the route. Seats 25 and 26 out of Campos. 2 raincoats, bought at 2:45. Mineral water at 3:15, with a receipt kept for the bottle deposit. A climb into Morro do Vintem before 4:30. Palm leaves laid side by side. A watch and wedding ring put away. Capsules scheduled for 6:30. 2 lead shields with no eye holes. And a family standing beside a stopped car after 7, watching orange light move above the hill. Miguel had expected to return the bottle. Neither man returned from the clearing.